Hello, one and all, and welcome to Ace in the Roll. Today, it's just me, and I have a little bit of a different video, because I'm going to be explaining some of the behind the scenes for our first act of the campaign Frozen Shadows, which is our currently running campaign. I am making sure to stay away from spoilers for anything that is yet to come. There are some slight things for Act 2, but there will be a spoiler warning before any of that. Now, obviously, this will be massive spoilers for the first section of the campaign. If you haven't seen that, then maybe go watch some or all of that and then come back. If you have seen it, well then, this is going to be way better. The biggest thing I want to talk about is Valamir, since he embodies all of my opinions about what makes a good antagonist and a twist villain. But we're going to save that for a little later in the episode, because I think we should go back to the start first. All the way back to Wilvin's Tavern. So Wilvin was actually originally a rock gnome up until the day that we were going to start episodes. Like, the day we recorded episode 1 was actually when Wilvin was switched to a deep gnome, and I decided that it would be Blobble's uncle, because Kyra wanted to tie in her character with the world a bit more through a relative in the region, and I thought Wilvin made a good choice. And on a walk, I actually just kind of go on walks when I want to think about things, and I thought up that maybe he works alongside a lot of the rebels, and now he's actually pretty important to the overall plot. Now, he has had a big impact on the story and was a favorite of the players for a long time. He's kind of fallen down though, since I believe Cain has usurped the gold medal, and Hector's introduction has pushed him down even a little further. I have been able to predict what the rest of the cast is going to do pretty well for the entire campaign. A lot of times I have predicted pretty much exactly what they're going to do in my notes and have like that outcome ready, or at least have thought through it. There's a couple times though that I haven't thought of what's going to happen beforehand. And Skelly's natural 20 apple throw in the first episode definitely was one of those times where I had no idea that was going to happen, obviously, because it was very spontaneous. And as well, it was random, because it was a natural 20. You can't really predict a nat 20. And that very night, I went and got a notebook out and wrote down something about having the apple guy come back. And I even titled the episode when it came out An Apple a Day, just so I could finish the line whenever that character returned, which ended up being in episode 9 with Can't Keep the Doctor Away. And honestly, I think episode 9 is the best episode of the first act. I really love that episode. Skelly nearly dying to just the apple guy, who does actually have a name, just it's not really out there. He also has custom stats, funny enough. I do have plans to release a lot of these stat blocks, but that might be a while, since some of them have things on there that I don't want known, such as the apple guy's name, just in case for some reason that ever comes up, even though currently I don't have plans for that. And I was actually going to show one of the cast members Artos' stat block, but he has some strengths and or weaknesses. I'm not going to really say specifically what's hidden on there, but there's some things they didn't figure out about him that are marked on there. I've realized that's the case with a lot of my stat blocks. Even with Mayor Hex, the players never even saw one of his attacks, because it only activates when he's grappling someone. Since they just kept, for some reason, not getting grappled, he just never got to use it. But hey, Mayor Hex is still out there. He's still got time. Who knows? Maybe he'll end up getting that attack on one of them. Since they did destroy his city, so I mean, he's kind of justified to be pretty mad about that. With like the orcs in Dorad in like the first episode, and also a little bit of second, and I think even fourth or fifth, and in Serpent's Cave, and at the garrison with Commander Artos, everything pretty much went exactly as I expected it would, because I've just gotten good at predicting what they're gonna do. The Ace in the Roll cast, I have found I can predict pretty well. Though they do some spontaneous things, they do stick with the plot very closely. In fact, sometimes to a fault, because there was a lot of side quests that I'm actually going to talk about a little later in this video, and kind of summarize, because now they're scrapped because they only fit certain places. They just completely missed them. I don't think they've actually gone off on a single side quest yet, unless it's one that they just made up on the spot. Which is kinda crazy to me, that they've just never done a side quest. And there are absolutely side quests, just there's sometimes side quest hooks here and there that the players just miss. So I think we should talk about a few plot points that go unnoticed to most people, but establish future ones. Even in the very first episode, we established that Wilvin is a rebel leader and he's fighting against the king. And in the very first episode, we established that Wilvin is a rebel leader and he's fighting against the king, and that introduces the main conflict of the whole campaign in the first half an episode, though I'm still free to try and get the players to question which side is right, which I try in later episodes with Valamir in particular. Okay, let's talk about Valamir, because a manipulative bad guy is really hard to write, especially when you don't know what the characters are gonna do and believe, and they could insight check or do stuff like that. Valamir is the part of the campaign that has taken the most planning, because his goal for the first act is to manipulate the characters into destroying Doldrum for him. And I don't want the players to know he is planning to recruit Mayor Hex as the new Glimmerfjord mayor, but I want to establish that he's looking for a replacement, so it makes sense later. So when they met him, he told them he didn't like being mayor in the first place, and as well, when he made them sign the contract, he made sure to tell them that Mayor Hex has to survive, and that they're not supposed to hurt anyone. He's been really fun to write, actually, because I need to guess what the players are going to do, so it has a certain challenge to it, to try and get them to do what I want. And honestly, that whole experience, I think, has taught me a lot about being a dungeon master, and how to not force anything, but convince the players to do things, even if they are actually working for the wrong side. And giving the players that kind of choice. And while I was trying to guess what the players could do, I actually don't think I messed up a single time throughout that entire section, because they pretty much did everything the exact way I want them to. And I think for anyone else who's looking to be a dungeon master out there, the biggest thing I've learned from all the dungeon mastering I've done, because I've actually only been playing for about a year now, which is kind of crazy to, be doing all of this already. But the biggest thing I've learned is just talk to your players a lot about what they're gonna do. You want to know their opinions on things. Ask them a lot of hypotheticals that have some aspect that ties in with the main campaign, while not telling them exactly what's gonna happen. Kind of leaving it up a little bit, like, oh, what part of this is relevant? And of course, I throw in a few questions that are completely just not relevant at all. Or I ask a question and repeat it for a bunch of NPCs, but then only like one or two actually matter. Even in those questions you ask that don't matter quite as much, they also offer good insight, so you can kind of almost refer to that later. And when the Valamir fight began, when the players had to do the Valamir boss battle, that, don't worry, they'll get another chance at, because they're gonna want to. And trust me, they talk to me about how and when they want to kill Valamir repeatedly off camera, so I absolutely know that they want to. But with the part where I needed someone to push him, I had all of those, like, insults and trying to goad them into it pre-written. I got down to my last note in my little, like, notes app on my phone, which I usually write everything down in a Word document, but for that I was using, like, just a notes app on my phone, some sticky notes. And seriously, Mega decided to have Skelly push him on the very last thing I had, and I was getting so worried. I don't think you can tell in the episode, but I was out. Like, that was my last thing I could say to get him to do it. And while I did have backup plans, they weren't quite as good. So I'm really glad that they actually did it. And as well, I wanted them to make sure they agree to his deal and a lot of other stuff, so I had to be very careful while weaving that web of lies. So a lot of the time of planning this campaign, and especially the first act, was sitting down and thinking through every way I can have Valimir trick the players, which took a lot of work. And I see why people don't do manipulative villains as much in D&D, but I think if you pull it off, and I honestly think it went perfect for Act 1. It's really good. And some things, you have to figure out right on the line of, like, get the players to do what you want, but just believable. Like Wilvan being the villain, because he's been set up as an anti-hero, so it's really easy to believe he could be a villain and a terrorist. Though I've always thought the best lies are the ones that are rooted in truth. So when Valimir said that Wilvan was working with Azurmane the Lich, he wasn't lying. But he did frame it in a way that demonized him. It made him look evil just by telling the truth in a less than optimal way. Or I guess you could say optimal way if you're looking from Valimir or my point of view. There are other secrets hidden within what Valimir says throughout the first act. But a lot of those things are bits to be expanded on later. So those actually haven't fully come up yet. So, you know, if you ever try and theory craft, might be worth looking back at everything Valimir says, because there might be some little bits of truth in there. Not everything, though. Not everything. And with that same topic, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on Valimir, though, this is probably the same percentage I spent out of all the writing time writing one character, because he is just complicated to work with. And he just embodies my opinions on a good twist villain. I personally think that if you don't see a villain doing evil things, they don't seem as bad. And I think a lot of Disney movies especially suffer from that, where a character seems perfectly good for an entire movie or just normal, and then suddenly it seems like they flip a switch and suddenly they're this evil mastermind, right? That isn't very fun to watch, in my opinion, or in this case, listen to. And that's why I decided to have Valimir reveal his evilness right at the end of Act 1. And while I don't want to say how many acts there are going to be, who knows, maybe this is like a 32-act play. It's not, but who knows, maybe it is. I think that it'll let him have the time he needs to be evil before the players get the chance to take him down, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he just died, I don't know, maybe he has a heart attack, or he just has a heart attack off camera and just dies before the players get there. Sorry for spoilers for acts, let's see, I think that's Act 29, when he has a heart attack and dies, because he's been waiting so long to fight the players. It's been like 8 years of real life time. Which is actually, I should probably bring this up. I don't really know where to put this in my script, but the entire campaign, up to the most recent episode before this video comes out, which would be episode 24, takes place in 16 days. I have actually calculated out how long it's taken them, and I've been tracking it. So, from Wilvan's Tavern 2, I said I wouldn't spoil anything from Act 2, so we'll say episode 24's end. That's all we'll say on that front. It has been 16 days, which is kind of insane. It has not been long. And travel with the airship they get at the end of that Act 1, is going to definitely fill up a lot of those days, because they have to travel, but... So they'll have been traveling for a while eventually. And back to that twist villain kind of thing, having the players help him initially means that they have a lot more involvement in his plans moving forward. And more so, the King's plans, who the players still don't even know his name or what he looks like. I mean, for all they know, he might not even be real, and that is an actual theory that one of the Ace in the Roll casts has said to me. Now, obviously I don't confirm anything off camera to them. I just like to hear their theories and almost just get their mind going so I can see where their opinions kind of drift and their thoughts go. They've definitely given me some interesting theories, which have been very fun to hear, and it's always very fun to hear theories like that. And I know I said some advice to like DMs, but if you're a player and you're in a homebrew D&D campaign that your DM has made, honestly, they would love to hear your theories, probably. I know I do. Whenever I'm DMing a campaign and someone has a theory that they want to share, or like thinks they've figured out something or want to try and predict something, I'm always like, yes, go for it. Because that's all it shows your DM you are engaged in the story, that you are excited to see where it goes, and you're thinking about it, not just when you're playing. And I think most DMs would really appreciate if you share those like theories and stuff, because it kind of shows them like, yeah, you're enjoying what they made. And the Ace in the Roll cast definitely shares a lot of stuff with me, and it was so fun. We can go for like hours talking about it sometimes, so it's incredibly fun. And if you ever have theories in the comments, you know I will respond to them. And even if it's like, oh, there's a plot hole here, point it out. Like, I'm always down to just chat about stuff. Like, since I've spent so much time working on writing a campaign, because it takes a very long time, it's always fun to be able to share that. And that's honestly one thing I've really enjoyed with making a D&D podcast. Even if it's not to the largest audience, it's really gratifying to make something and have a group you'll enjoy it, and then also be able to share that experience. And it's really, really cool. And of course, because of all of my twist villain work, and Valamir just comes up a lot because he takes a lot of work to do, so he'll definitely be back. Who knows how many episodes. Another thing that's been just a blast to do for this campaign is the stat blocks. Now that some of these have passed and their story point has already gone by, I can show their stats. But we're saving some of those. So I'm not going to put too much up on screen right now. We're just going to show just one. And it is the first one that was custom for the series, really. I guess not the first character that came on screen with custom stats, because that would be Wilvin. But the first boss. And this one's the Stone Serpent. And I realized that in that episode I said that I'd post on the Ace in the Roll Twitter, because I'm usually, if you see a post on the Ace in the Roll Twitter or on the Ace in the Roll YouTube, it is me. The Stone Serpent is actually just my real life pet. His name is Noodle. He's a zigzag eel. I actually am looking over to his tank right now while recording this video. I don't really see him, but here's a picture up on screen of what he actually looks like, and then there's the art for him. Essentially, I was trying to think of what kind of monster I thought would be cool, and I was just kind of looking off into the fish tank where he lives. and I saw him burrow it, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. And then he's a predator. He eats little worms and stuff. And I kind of realized he could make a really fun mini-boss. And so that's kind of where that came from. And I actually got his main legendary action, and I'll get into legendary actions later. But where he fluidizes the ground, I actually got that from a Mark Rober video. I believe he makes like a sand hot tub, and I thought, I don't know how exactly scientifically accurate this is, but he essentially does that to the ground around him to make people sink in, as if it's more almost like a super liquid instead of gravel, which was a very fun move. And that one always catches people off guard, though I think doing that move was a mistake in the end, and I think everyone makes them. But I'm realizing status effects that make it so the player can't do things are overall take away from the enjoyment of the players. Which means I think you'll see going forward that I'm going to be trying not to use status effects that do that, and still offering opportunities to do things, even if they are impaired in some way, whether it be like vision or like deafened or maybe partially petrified, who knows. But honestly, I love making boss battles, and I think that love of just making really just cool attacks is something you'll see just get crazier and crazier throughout the campaign. And there's some insane attacks later on in the campaign, and a lot of them are Act 2 and onward, and some of them have already been shown, and I can't talk about all of them here because this is just an Act 1 video, but there's some really fun ones. Especially in, I want to say it's episode 21, there's a fun one that I like. Episode 22 has some. Upcoming episodes are going to have some insane ones, and if you're caught up, you probably know what I'm going to be talking about. So that's pretty self-explanatory if you're caught up. I have adapted my layer designs to not do status effects that would impair the player's actions and choice. So him and Commander Artos both have legendary actions and are for the players to fight first level. And that is a little bit controversial, because legendary actions are usually saved for pretty powerful creatures. I disagree. I think legendary actions should be saved for boss battles. Just boss battles, only bosses. And that's kind of hard to categorize in D&D, because you could really use a creature for a boss, and then on a way higher level campaign it could just be a normal enemy. So I think you'll be able to tell which creatures and monsters and people in the Ace in the Roll campaign, and maybe more going forward, who knows, will be bosses, because they will always have legendary actions, even if it's a mini boss like the Stone Serpent. Artos was actually meant to die at the first battle, but before the campaign started I actually realized, and having the potential, that could keep coming back and in new forms like the players encounter later. But that's next act, and that's not too much of a spoiler because it's on the thumbnail of one of the videos. Another big thing I want to go over in this video is just the way I write. I don't write a plot and then write characters to fill it. I instead choose to write characters and decide how their interactions would shape the world around them. Essentially, I design the most important characters to the world building, and then work down to the people who don't have as much say in the government or world, like Hector, or just random villagers. And I like doing it in this way because really, we shape the world around us, and the most powerful people shape it the most. So working down like that makes a more cohesive and believable world, because starting up at high up people like the king, and then working down to people like Azramain, and then Valamir, Wilvin, those super important people, kind of almost trickles down, and each one shapes the layers below them as they kind of have a ripple effect that runs through the entire world around them. When it comes to a plot, I just figure out what is an issue that would arise with these characters. And if there really isn't one, then maybe we'll tie in a few more, see where I can kind of slide in someone, and then kind of shape them based on the people above them in the hierarchy. And essentially, how I can make different things happen is just tweak the personalities of different characters. It's almost like pulling little strings to solve a little puzzle. Because one motivation can shape so much. Since Valamir is pretty important, if he liked being mayor and also a general at the same time, then he would never really want to destroy Doldrum. Or at least, as far as you guys know. He might have other reasons, but those aren't exposed yet if there are any. Or if there's any reasons of his higher-ups to tell him to do that. But that's also with their motives. And essentially, giving them different personality traits can shape an entire section. Because making a character do a single action in their past, which I think you'll see with a particular important character and Skelly's arc and backstory, can very much shape their future and the world around them. I've always believed that this is the best way to write. Characters first, and then see how they shape the world. Just working down that hierarchy. And along with these characters shaping the world, the players have to shape the world, because their backstories need to tie in, because that makes it way better. And I love D&D because it is a cooperative storytelling experience. And letting the players have their own backstories and then tying them into the story, it makes it so much better, because then they have connections. They know things that apply to the story, and they have a personal stake in it in the end. And those ripple effects can change a lot of things. And because of character backstories, I have tweaked a lot of things with the campaign. Many, many things. And honestly, I think it's made it so much better. And I just think it's so nice to have that cooperative storytelling experience. Now, this is a bit of, I guess, maybe a possibly more controversial idea. But it's more about D&D campaigns in general, and applying it to this in particular. It's about how much of a safety net do you give your players. When the players mess up, do you save them? Or do you let them die? Do you let them face the consequences of their actions, or do you give them another chance? And I had ways for the players to not get TPK'd for the entire first act. Now, I'd like to point this out before someone in the comments is like, oh, this ruins the integrity of the entire first act to know this, because now they couldn't have died. No, they could have died. I just wouldn't have let the entire party die. So, yeah, no, they still could have died. Because it would be really dumb if the entire party died first act, and I think that would ruin it more than having the idea that at least one of them will always make it through. Now that we're a little further on, they do not have this safety net anymore. If they were to mess up really bad, they could actually get TPK'd. And they almost did one time. Because in Act 2, there was a moment that they only got saved for one reason, and it was because of scheduling a special guest the next episode, and I didn't have enough time for them to pay the consequences for their actions. They were so lucky that that's the day they messed up, because any other occasion, they might have gone to prison. There's a lot of stuff that could have happened, but we'll go into that if I ever make a Act 2 behind the scenes video. Though Act 2 is still going on, and the first act was 14 episodes, and we're getting pretty close to episode 28. I think Act 2 is going to be a little bit longer, but it's coming up. It's definitely coming up. Also, with giving the players an out, sometimes that feels a little bit scripted, and I don't like that. I hate when stuff feels scripted, which is why there's always ways for at least like one or two to die if they really mess up. Though there is a fight that I think some people might think feels a little bit scripted, and it's Valamir's battle against the players, where he is substantially stronger than all of them combined. And he wins. And he leaves as the victor. There are ways that the players could have beat Valamir. I don't know if they could have done it, all of them surviving. So there was alternate endings to that. There's also an ending where they do enough damage that he actually retreats, and there's a couple other ways in there that could have gone. But I think if you were going to almost say like the true ending, and the one I was hoping would happen, was what happened. Though, since I just don't like stuff being too scripted like that, and there was ways that they could have won, or they could have gotten in big danger, possibly died. Though Valamir actually didn't want to kill them all. He wanted a message to send. So really the safety net wasn't there, but the character just didn't want to kill him because he saw them more as an asset. So I said earlier we would go over some side quests that have been missed throughout the campaign. And in Glimmerfjord especially, there was a bunch of side quests for if they want to get gold to stock up on weapons or buy stuff in the future. And they could have actually gone to the theater for some of that. There was an old man that would tell them that he had no show but already sold tickets. The players would have been given limited in real life time to figure out what to do and then essentially perform via roles and their creativity. I'd be granting buffs and debuffs and different things if the players did good or bad, and maybe they might get a little extra if they did really good. And I think that would have been fun if the players did it. I think that's a pretty simple one. Who knows, maybe I'll use it again. I don't really see a spot that would fit, since now the main story's really picked up, and it's gonna get going even faster soon. It's an exponential trend of just crazy. So I'm really excited. There's also a fight club hidden beneath the tavern in Glimmerfjord. I don't remember exactly what I said to introduce the concept at the time, and I haven't gone back into the video to check. But there was a trapdoor where the players could climb down and challenge people for money. Since bets would pay them a bit if they win, harder opponents are worth more because more people would be betting against them. Again, it's pretty simple, but it could have been just kind of fun to see how the characters interact with that kind of environment. Now, there was actually a really big one, and looking back on it, I think things would have gone a little bit differently if they actually did this one. Because there was a challenge that the players would be put through if they had followed Azurmane's cultists into an alleyway and then figured out how to get into their little hideout, since they do have a hideout in that city. And I'm gonna save a lot of details of this just in case for some reason I need to use it. I don't know where it would fit, and that's what I'm talking about here, but it was essentially a set of challenges that the players would have to complete, and they would get a lot of gold and reputation in that faction. And reputation is actually a thing in this campaign, which is a kind of behind the scenes thing. And hey, this is the behind the scenes video, so let's talk about it. I track how much every faction likes each player. You know, I'll even throw it up on screen in a sec. Remember, might be spoilers because this is the up-to-date version for the most recent episode, which would be episode 24. So, you know, just don't really read too much into it if you're not quite caught up yet and don't want to be too spoiled, because there might be some implications on it, and maybe even factions you don't know of. This is how I visualize how good of a reputation the players have in each faction. And essentially it helps me guide character interactions by finding what faction they would be most allied with, or if they're just kind of their own person. So honestly, I think a chart like this is super useful, and I'd recommend if you're DMing something that has a lot of factions and it kind of has that more political makes it sound like real world political, but I mean, it is still technically political stuff going on, even though it is like a rebellion against a king and all that, and it's nothing related to the real world, technically still political. But I think it's super useful, because it also helps you prepare for if you ever want your players to have to face consequences for their actions. Now, before I wrap up, I think we should talk about some of the art and music for the show. And if you're ever wondering about this music that plays when we start the show, that is written by our very own Kyra Hammerstrom. In fact, Kyra was so tired when this intro music and outro music was written that V didn't remember what it sounded like after it was done. And I actually played it for her one time, and that's when I found that out. There are other tracks that have been used for the show that Kyra wrote, but they're in Act 2, so that's for another video. Very good tracks. I believe they are mentioned in comments on those videos, specifically calling them out. Though those are Act 2, so that's a whole other video. And as far as art goes, there is a lot of art that's not in the main show, since I have a good amount. So the easiest character design So the earliest character design would be an alternate sweater design for Skelly. This was designed pretty early on because he requested this sweater at the either end of first episode or start of second episode. And he ended up getting that orc sweater that's red with a little orc head. This design was just a pink fluffy one, and Megan and I both like the red one more, so that's what got used. But this version just still exists in my files. We also have art for Hector, which has never actually been used, and it was made more recently because I decided he actually needed some art for the show so I could use him in thumbnails and stuff, though he just hasn't really been in a thumbnail. But hey, here it is right now. He would be wearing just a white shirt and dark cotton pants when they met him, but this is his long-term design now that he's been out in the cold areas and has some cold weather gear. I also have a lot of alternate Skelly designs from when we were making the Act 2 Skelly design, because I sort of just threw various coats, cloaks, and capes I already had made onto him, just with other characters that were wearing them, and just kind of popped them onto that character. This is what some of them look like. I know they're not great, but they're just kind of tossed on there as like almost a model to work off of. He also had some heavier armor for a while, and I drafted up a version with some red, but I think that this version that we ended up using is the best. Though I never actually showed him the red version, since it was originally planned for him to get a red sword, though in the final version of Act 2 it was a dark metal one that lights on fire. Lastly, with character designs, there's a little detail that I don't think anyone's noticed. This does carry over to Act 2, so slight spoilers ahead, but not really big ones. When Skelly has the Episode 4 flashback, he sees a man who is eventually said to be named Tempest Stormweaver. And I'll show his design right now. You'll see he has a blue coat and a silver and gold pauldron, which is like a shoulder plate. Then in Act 2, when Soren Lazuli meets the players, he has a similar coat and pauldron. This is because the champion mantle is passed on by the storm god, Izadel. Also, yes, that is the storm god's actual name, Izadel. That should already be public on a Twitter and YouTube community post, and also Blubble already knows that, though I don't think anyone else does. But there's one more person with this gold pauldron, and you're actually seeing them on screen right now, because you might notice I'm actually wearing the exact same thing as Soren. And this is because Soren is a character I played in the first D&D campaign I ever played, which was a little over a year now. This is because originally this campaign that is Frozen Shadows and is being used for Ace in the Roll was written for that group that I played that campaign with, and got heavily adapted to be this show. And now it's been changed a lot and been made a lot better. But that's why I'm dressed exactly the same as Soren, though I don't think anyone's ever actually noticed. Also, yes, there is a story behind some of the other stuff related to him, and there's a reason why it is carried over into this show. I promise, it's not just for randomness, and just a reference that only I get. I promise, there's a reason. And one little last... Actually, I'm not going to say that, because that's Act 2. Well, if you made it to the end of the video, maybe you should subscribe. If you already are, thank you. We appreciate our funny little D&D channel. And thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you guys in a future episode. Bye, everyone.